Welcome to module number 5, MoR processes. In this module, we will cover the following objectives. We will describe the MoR process. We would look into terminology used to describe individual process steps and describe each step of the MoR process in terms of its goals, inputs, outputs, techniques, and tasks. So here we have a graphical representation of the MoR process. If you have noticed on this particular process, there are 5 steps in the process. There is the identification step. We assess, we plan, we implement. These steps, they kind of facilitate the effective implementation of risk management. These steps are interlinked and they need to be performed in a sequence. MoR process is iterative. The steps, as we have seen, are represented in a cycle of arrows, as it is common for the entire process to be completed several times in the life cycle of an organizational activity. There are not 4, but 6 steps in the process. This is because the identification step has 2 sub-steps, which we will kind of look at shortly. Assess step also has 2 sub-steps. So let me just kind of take you through the high-level understanding of each of these steps. Let's kind of begin with the first one, which is the identification step. So when you identify the risks, there are a couple of sub-steps that you need to think about. You identify the context in which you are working, and then you identify the risks in that particular context. Let's say, for example, the risk that we are identifying are at the project level, and the context could be a project context. So it's good to kind of know what are the elements within that particular project context and articulate those risks and put that in a risk register. And when we evaluate a particular risk, estimate a single risk, and then we also evaluate the risks at a collective level. Now, estimation is where you take a particular risk and you try to determine what is the criticality of that particular risk, So you capture the probability scale, you capture the impact scale, and you come out with the risk exposure. The risk exposure might suggest this is a high risk, or something that we do at a collective level. So you take all the risk and you try to understand the risk profile of the entire project or program that we are working on. So the 2 sub-steps of the assess step. So we identify, we assess. That's how we've got 6 steps involved in the MoR. Now kind of look into the terminology to describe the process steps. We shall use the following terminology. Now, every process within the framework has got inputs, and every process has got outputs, and there are certain tasks and techniques that we're going to use. Basically, the key outcomes of the process, they are called goals. Inputs are the components of information that would transform the process. Now, think about a simple example of baking a cake. Let's say the goal is to bake the cake. If you want to bake a cake, you need certain inputs, is it not? You need certain ingredients. You need flour, you need eggs, you need sugar, so on. And then you take those inputs and you carry out a series of tasks. And then as a result of using those tasks and techniques, you convert that component into an output, which is a baked cake. So good to kind of use the following process model to design a particular process. For example, when you think about the identification process, when we identify the risks, we need to look into inputs such as, let's say, the organization facts or documents, policy documents, environment. Then we we carry out a few tasks, we conduct workshops, we use brainstorming techniques, questionnaires, risk breakdown structures. The ultimate result is you have a well-articulated set of risks that go into a risk register. Now, let's kind of look into some of the common barriers to risk management. Of organizational culture that appreciates the benefits of risk management is a common barrier. Oftentimes, in certain cultures, if you articulate a risk, you're kind of penalized. So that kind of hinders the process of collecting risk. Immature risk management practices is another common barrier. Facilitation in terms of resources and time is another common barrier. A lack of policies, process, strategies, and plans. Sometimes we don't have senior management sponsorship. That is a barrier. Formal risk tools and techniques. Lack of clear guidance for managers and staff. Lack of incentives for participation in risk management activities. Well, you could just take a few minutes, maybe reflect on some of these barriers and see what are the barriers that are relevant for your organization. Risk management health checks, they usually include questions that aim to address one or more of these barriers. Let's kind of study each of the process in a slightly more detail. So remember the process model that we kind of looked at. So the first process that we have is identify context. So let's kind of look into what the goal of this particular step is. The goal of this particular step is to gather detailed information about a planned activity and how it fits into the organization and society as a whole. And when you look into the inputs, you have a series of documents that are closely examined to gain a detailed understanding of the activity being undertaken. The inputs should contain adequate information to provide clarity on the objectives, scope, timeframes, budget, and participation. So let me take you through a few of the inputs over here. We've got regulatory framework and corporate governance requirements. We might want to understand what is the context of the overall risk. We have an organization risk management policy that kind of comes in as an input, because an organization policy might talk about risk appetites at an organizational level. Do we have an organizational process guide? Are there any relevant documents which could be useful? Any lessons learned on the past projects? Those would provide us the needed inputs. We kind of take them through a series of techniques. For example, to really understand the risk appetite in the policy and regulatory framework, we might want to kind of call in a stakeholder meeting and analyze the stakeholder needs. We could do a broader PESTEL analysis. PESTEL stands for political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental analysis. What does the political landscape look like? What is the economic landscape, social environment, technological landscape? Then we might want to do a bit of SWOT analysis, identify the strengths and weaknesses of the organization. What are the opportunities and threats? Horizon scanning, defining the probability and impact grid are some of the techniques that we use. And we kind of come out with a series of outputs. We come out with an activity analysis, a plan, particular activity, a stakeholder map document, and the lessons learned